welcome back to THU TV. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the talk so far. I'm here with Ian and Scott, and I want to talk to you guys mainly what I thought would be great to bring you two guys together is to really talk about the human form and representing humans, because that's a subject, as you know, it was something that I'm interested in talking about when I do the WikiHuman project, but I think there's a lot of things that people can take away that you guys can offer to let them know about what's important when they're representing human forms. So I want to start with faces, okay? Because this is something that you and I have been working on the WikiHuman project. You did an incredible presentation on portraits, right?
Yeah, thank you.
And what was great about your presentation is the amount of reference you use from art.
That's right, yeah.
So actual art, classical art, right?
Yeah.
So tell me specifically what your goal was when you said art, has a timeless feeling to it when a painting does.
Yeah.
And why can't CG characters have the same timeless feeling to them?
This is exactly right. Like a Rembrandt painting you'll see, which was painted hundreds of years ago, but you still connect with it because it's got like a human emotion which you can connect with, whereas like digital stuff, you kind of, some of the tools and programs kind of get in the way of that, I find. And it's like, if you have a portrait done 5 years ago, you can almost tell it's done 5 years ago. So I feel like my goal is to try and get over that so you don't actually see when it was created.
Right.
So it's like if you're using Marvel as designer, it's like you shouldn't be able to tell what program you used to make the artwork.
Right.
The artwork should stand by itself.
Yeah, or say like, oh, that uses this rendering engine, or that uses this, whatever it is. That's not the point of it, right?
No, they're just tools.
They're just tools.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but what you do is you spend a lot of time studying art history to look at specific things of portraiture.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's an important tool to do to make sure that your human forms are represented in a way that makes sense. It's not just a T-pose, right? Because that will definitely give it away that it's CG. Yeah. But Scott, you also look at a lot.
Maybe the T-pose is actually the relevant thing to place it in chronological time, though.
Yeah,
like art
I guess so.
represents the period that it's created in, right? And that's something that honesty in art is about. The topic of the day. It's all the references that are brought in to make it. Like, I'm not actually saying people should do this in a T-pose, but that is
the T-pose definitely does represent something.
It does. It represents this era in 21st century kind of art tool production.
To be honest, they did represent the T-pose a lot.
A long time ago.
Jesus Christ is always represented in classic T-pose.
There you go. Exactly. Or the Vitruvian Man.
Right.
Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. But anyway, sorry about that.
No, that's good. I'm glad.
Anybody who's listening, don't do T-poses because I don't think it actually makes for good art. I was just playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, but you have you're most known. Well, I know you as the person that really understands anatomy. Has taken a lot of time to look at anatomy and understand that, and that's an important part of, what Ian and I have had a conversation for the last 2 years about is about the human face and emotion and the uncanny valley and all those things.
Sure.
But those are things that are represented in the face, but the anatomy and the way that a body is put together is an incredibly important thing. So tell us a little bit about the work that you've done in that field.
Well, it's kind of an ongoing life's work to kind of deepen my own understanding of anatomy. It's become kind of an obsession, and it's something that I teach widely, and I learn from the students that I teach. Deepens my knowledge even more, just kind of reframing how I think about it. But it's kind of the prerequisite for representing the figure in whatever way you do it, in my opinion. That it's, I say this in all my talks, but it's like the vocabulary of figurative art. If you don't understand the nouns and the verbs of the body, then you're gonna have a hard time putting together a composition.
But it also does things like make sure you have the right proportions.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a hierarchy of representation, and the thing about the body and the face is that, I mean, at the core structures, it's mechanical. right? And
Right.
it's a machine, really. I mean, we have soft actuators and, impulses actuate them, and we run on carbohydrates and things. But really, it's a machine, right? It's levers and pulleys and actuators, and so there's just a lot of complexity to it. I mean, probably more complexity than we can create mechanically.
Right.
Like it's talking about robots or things. We don't have the sophisticated structures that we've evolved biologically
Right.
to make robots of similar proportions yet. But yeah, I mean, it's to represent it. I mean, to understand it kind of medically is one thing. Like, I think we've probably kind of sussed out musculoskeletal anatomy almost completely for 100 years, right?
Okay.
Like, but artistically to represent it, or technologically to re-implement it, like even in CG, like with the most sophisticated rigs and computer graphics, really, really hard, really big challenge still.
Yeah, I think it's what's interesting about it is that you mentioned robotics, right?
Sure.
And it's the same thing with the body and the face. The uncanny valley graph actually comes
From
robotics,
robotics, yes.
right? And
Japanese
so
roboticists.
that graph, for those of you who may not know about it, is about the representation of humans and whether you have a positive or negative response to that. And the closer, the argument that was done for robotics, and this was done in the 1970, I believe, was that the closer a robotic entity looks to a human, the more positive response you get, until it's very close, but not close enough, and you get a very negative response. And that's what they call the uncanny valley. But it is a thing where, like, if the motion doesn't look quite right, it's the same problem.
Yeah,
right?
yes, animation probably definitely suffers in the uncanny valley.
Right.
When you know that it's an attempt to.
It exaggerates
to
that valley. The chasm gets
sure,
deeper,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about your history, Ian, and then we'll talk about yours as well. I just want to bounce back and forth, if that's okay. What sort of got you? I remember you told an amazing. Well, it wasn't even part of your talk. It was part of the Q&A, where people were asking you about art school.
Yeah.
And how art school was sort of, even though you're such an incredible artist, you felt like you failed at art school.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I definitely had a passion towards doing representational work, but I think the art school really pushed me towards just expression. And it's just like to get rid of all representational and just do expressional work. And it's like my heart is.
Why do you feel that art schools did that?
I'm not sure exactly. I feel like they thought it was like this is the new wave of, this is the new arts, like the more expressional work. But I feel like for me it's like more like we can't lose track of where we came from. Like because portraiture has been done for all of history, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it anymore. We have new tools to do it, so we should still explore
Right.
what we're doing. Because we've done portraiture since like caveman times, where people would do like those caveman drawings on the walls. That's a representation of a human.
Right.
So it's like we always want to use the latest tools to represent the human figure.
Right.
And I feel like art schools kind of like, well, let's get away from that a little bit and not represent the like true representation, but express more of the internal self.
Right.
So I do. I try to combine a bit of both. Still, I still want to show the expression as well as the representation.
Yeah, I think what was interesting is that obviously you also were mentioning the fact that you have two brothers.
That's
They're both in the creative field, right? You're David, I believe.
Yeah, David's the installation
is
artist.
the installation artist, and so that is and it's much more of a contemporary art thing. It's beautiful work, by the way, but you're right. It is interesting and different. And then obviously Richard is also an animation director, right?
Animation supervisor.
Supervisor
at
over
MPC.
at MPC. Okay, and so he's the one who got you into 3D, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after art school, it's like I wasn't really sure what my direction was.
Right.
And I started drawing and sketching a lot, and I realized that it's like the human figure is what I love, and it's like representational work is what I love. And then Richard was just like, why don't you just go to 3D? Like go to Seneca in Toronto. And as soon as he said that, it was like a button just clicked in my head. I was
Right.
like, of course.
Yeah.
This is what I meant to do.
And you've done some incredible work. You did your talk that I went to yesterday, sort of had the timeline of your portraits as they've progressed and the relationship you did. What I loved about it is I basically got to hear your story of you and your family as we moved along this timeline of every portrait you make and then your work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of a beautiful thing, and I think it was really great to sort of see that story happen.
I had a conversation with Scott this morning. He said it was great to see them all together. I'm thinking of each portrait as like a separate,
Right.
like separate piece in itself. But Scott was like, well, if you put them all together, then I can see you as an artist.
Right.
And then you see the style. And you
Yeah,
can see
because
me
that
more.
first and last frame of your presentation was all of those portraits.
That's right.
Yeah, but to see it as a body of work is really special.
Right.
Because any single one, you kind of understand.
Right.
You kind of understand the goal and the intention. But
Yep.
when you see 12 in a sequence, you can't help but understand the intention. Because they're coming from the same artist and it's the same process. And then it's really powerful. And then I felt like I got a lot of insight looking at them as a group. Because I'd only seen them individually before.
Right.
But seeing them together was really, really special.
Yeah, because like when they're individually, you don't know if it's like a happy accident
Or just a one-off,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's, one-offs are cool, and they're sometimes are really impressive, but to see that that's the consistent style and the consistent treatment and the same consideration, the same thoughtful consideration to composition in each one, it becomes evident that there is something deeper than just a rendering.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely it was very successful. I was extremely happy to see that talk. 'Cause,
thank you.
It was really great, and I've been a fan of your work for a long time. And digital humans is something that's very important to me.
Yeah.
I think there is a very special role they get, but I will talk that a little bit later because I want to ask your opinion about it.
Sure.
But let's go. You and I were on the beach a few days ago, being tortured.
Yeah.
But
Strangely.
while we were coming back, we had a long conversation. You told me a little bit about your history and how you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, how far back did we go? Remind
I
me.
think there was some that we were talking about, dial-up modems and doing some stuff there. But then I think you said you first started doing CG on SGIs. Is that right? Or
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely. So,
the same.
I guess
boat.
my background is, I have a love for figurative drawing and art since I was a kid.
Right.
Like fifth grade, it was sparked for me by another kid who came into class and was amazing, and I kind of wanted to do amazing stuff since then. Yeah, aspirations for like comic books and inspiration from comic books and all sorts of things. But then I studied engineering in college because I had good talent for math and science, and I did enjoy it. I
Yeah.
enjoyed both math and science.
I was an art and math major.
Yeah, there's some of us that are like that, and it's just kind of an inseparable thing about me. But so when we were doing, when I was doing engineering, we had silicon graphics reality engines
Right.
in the computer lab, and I remember very clearly the exact moment that I fell in love with computer graphics, and that
Okay.
was going in for like one of our programming lessons, and they were showing us what the reality engine could do, and they had a sphere on the screen, projected on the wall in front of us, and it had a chrome environment map, right? So a reflection map, and somebody just with the mouse, he just plucked one of the vertices and pulled it out and let it go,
and the
it
reflections
just
warped?
propagated the waves over the surface, and the
Right.
reflections warped, and like, oh my God, it's so realistic. It's so realistic. And then kind of, to put it in context, this was we were doing GL programming before it was even OpenGL.
Right.
And we were, it was making polygons, coding polygons by putting in the vertex coordinates in and things like
what
that.
Were you using?
But
Were you using Wavefront or?
no, we're just writing in C.
Writing in C, okay.
It was, it was interesting, but thinking back was awful.
Right.
I would not want to replicate that experience.
Right.
And it's pretty low fidelity, but it was really magic, because it was a thing. I could see this thing that was, I love to make pictures, pen and ink, drawing, sculpting a little bit. And then I'm like, wow, this is really interesting tech, possibilities artistically, and obviously it wasn't ready for prime time like art production by a long shot. I mean, but I kept following it and kept track of it, and Maya 0 came out, Maya 1, whatever you want to call it, and that was cool, and that was a lot of potential there. And then, for me as a sculptor, it started to be when ZBrush was released.
ZBrush was the watershed moment, I think, what really changed the way that people started thinking about characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was
Really hard to represent any characters before that. I remember.
I mean, you have the veterans in the CG industry that were patch modelers.
I know.
and things,
Alex
and
Alvarez doing all of
nerds
these
modeling.
creatures in patches. It's like, oh my gosh,
And,
what a horrible nightmare that was.
It was.
Yeah. So some of us remember that, and I didn't do much with it, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, I was just kind of flirting with it, as playing around to see it. Like, that's way too hard. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make anything, intentional with that, because it's just clumsy.
Right.
For the kind of intention that I had, doing work in clay on the side. So it was, but that in ZBrush, like the first significant release was like 1.55 B, I think was the name of it, if I remember correctly. And that was, they had like the capabilities to sculpt 10,000 polygons.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, otherwise it was a paint package, right? The first ZBrush was just a kind of a pseudo, 3D depth map
Right.
package, right? The pixel technology, but that 10,000 polygons was like amazing to sculpt on,
Right.
and then it just got better from there.
I remember my first character I ever modeled was just in Maya, and it's just like it took me a month just to like push and pull vertices until
Right.
it looked something like it was still fell right into an uncanny valley. But it's
Yeah.
like I just couldn't get out of it. But it took me so long to figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's really hard to do that. There was a guy I worked with at Digital Domain. His name was Dan Platt, and he actually did a lot of anatomy classes as well. He used to work for Rick Baker back in the day.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
he's,
yeah.
but he would literally just pull vertices.
Yeah, yeah.
in
I remember
Maya.
his work.
Huh?
I remember his work. I was very
Yeah,
inspired
because he
by it.
did like Benjamin Button's head and all those other stuff. So he's really interesting. But it is kind of nice to have those tools now, right? I mean, those sculpting tools really kind of helped sculpt basically
Yeah,
and make
yeah,
it much easier, much more intuitive. I know you're much more of a Munchbox user yourself,
Yeah,
right?
Mudbugs.
And you like ZBrush, but just the
I
idea.
can't believe I'm sitting on the same
I
sofa
know,
with you,
he
man.
doesn't
I didn't know
act-
that.
So let me ask, it's actually is
Scoot over.
is Mudbox and ZBrush actually like, is there an animosity to it in the same way that like rendering engines fight?
Not between users necessarily, but and I can't actually speak for the companies.
Right, but I mean, I'm
maybe.
just curious about
But
it. It's
maybe,
interesting.
maybe.
But yes, so I think that's really an important part of where technology sort of helped bring this stuff forward for a lot of people. Right, it's when sculpting became more of a thing.
I think
Yeah.
like when technology got better, it's the less you saw technology because it allowed the artist to be the artist,
Right.
which I.
Do you think there's still obstacles right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the obstacles in the technology that's stopping you from going, as easy as possible, or making it more challenging?
Well, it's like when you're working for a company, it's like they always want to keep the same topology, like the same vertex count, so they can blend between characters and stuff like this.
Right.
And then, like sometimes you want to completely change something. And
Right.
It's like the work world kind of wants to keep things like a certain way, but personally, it's like you can have a lot more freedom still.
Right. So yeah, that's interesting. The idea of blend shapes, right?
Yeah.
And animations.
Yeah.
And different things like that. Blend shapes are. I'm still not convinced that blend shapes is the right way to go, in a lot of ways. And
For facial
for
expressions.
facial expressions or. Yeah, because for body we use mostly muscle systems, right?
Yeah.
Do you think muscle systems are going to be a way that you can animate faces? Because
Well,
there's talk about it, but I haven't seen anything.
You know where everything's going. Everything is going towards simulation.
Simulation.
I mean, and so it's as computational power increases. I mean, blend shapes are just like a very crude method to approximate what the face does. I mean,
Right.
if you have the ability to, I mean, we're going to look back on the tech that we have now
Yeah,
in 10 years and
absolutely.
be like, what are you talking about? Blend shades is like trivial.
Well, I
it's
know
a trivial
that,
thing. but
yeah, I know
because-
that a lot of people are doing like literally facial capture now, right?
Yeah, well,
Like,
facial
scans
facial
every
capture, and then
second.
you get the people doing, using that as an input to simulation
And deep
engines to
learning.
simulate the soft tissue, and just the layers, or for example, MRI scan the face and segment out the facial muscles and segment out the fat pads and then use that as the inputs to simulation, right? So you get full, finite element
Right.
simulation of soft tissue deformation and fidelity in the wrinkles and, things that, if, and this comes back to the digital humor project, like if the goal is absolute realism, the way to get there is with data.
Yes.
And that's exactly
That's what
what
I'm
you
trying to
guys
do.
talk about. And
Right.
That's what your project is.
And we're not necessarily going for absolute realism. We're just saying this is as good as we can do objectively, right?
Yes, but understanding that it's sample driven as opposed to
Absolutely.
artistically driven, which is the real big difference, right? When you
Yep.
take because a lot of times, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and you've studied more portraiture history than I have, but a lot of times it was 19th century portraiture. There was no photography. How can we remember this person who's significant, and we'll get somebody to represent him by painting him?
Right.
Right. And so I imagine, and I don't have any statistics or any information to back this up, but when cameras came, there were a lot of portraiture artists that were out of work.
Yeah.
Because, we'll take a picture of him
Right.
instead. And
It's always the ones which are the most artistic which are remembered, though. So you might get the most realism, but it's the ones where the photographer is like they add the beauty to it.
Sure.
And those are the ones which always get passed on and remembered.
sure, no, of course, there's always the art that
Yeah.
can be injected into the process.
Right.
In the same way, like, what is the next evolution of capturing the face? If we're talking about portraiture, it's what you're doing, right?
Right. Well, the guys at ICT, they flew up to the White House and they captured Obama, and they've done a full facial scan of Obama. It's now in the Smithsonian.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So-
exactly. That's
Yeah.
that could be the contemporary.
And they did the same thing
portraiture.
with Lincoln, right? They actually did a plaster cast of Lincoln's face
Yeah.
long ago. So it's not just a portraiture anymore or a painting. But even that, let's go back to your idea. They still do paintings of presidents. Right?
Yeah. They still need to present these things. Like, as an artist who needs to present it, you can't just take the scan of Obama and just like, there we go. It's like you still need to be able to present it to the audience in a
Absolutely.
beautiful way.
Yeah, I mean, right now, and it because it's a scan, it's just bits and bytes, right?
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
actually like something tangible. But
And that's the interesting part. Like when you take what is just the machines in charge of the process,
right,
then is it really is not a piece of art? But as soon as so imagine the two endpoints, the endpoint where you have a perfect scan of a face with all the data and the specular maps and everything, and then you have Ian who's crafted something that maybe at the endpoint they're exactly the same,
Right.
but this has the artist's hand involved, so this becomes a piece of art
yeah, absolutely,
by definition.
yeah.
And
We actually
it's
gonna-
the filter that it goes through.
Yeah,
the
we're gonna
artist.
we actually need to wrap it up because we gotta get to the next one. But before we go, I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about where people can see your work. So Scott, where can we see some of your work?
So a couple projects that I have, all my personal work and kind of my comings and goings and my anatomy courses are on scott-eaton.com.
Yeah.
And then my big figure reference library, which is kind of recently launched as reference for artists and figure study, is bodiesinmotion.photo,
Okay.
and you can find it there.
Oh, awesome.
Big resource for people.
Yeah, that's great. And we talked about that site. It sounds really fascinating. So definitely go check it out. Bodiesinmotion.com.
.photo.
Sorry.
Yeah, don't go to the .com. He's trying to get money out of me.
Okay. All right. And then Ian, what about your work?
So yeah, but just my website, ianspriggs.com, or you can just follow me on ArtStation. I'm always posting
Oh yeah,
my
you
work.
are on our station quite a
Yeah.
bit as well. Yeah, awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Thank you.